Wasting money on cures. Forgot how to fix myself. They say that time is free. Then why is it so precious? Oh, I'll say memories in my head, like Polaroids on walls. They remind you to look ahead. Time is running out. Time is running out. Lately I've lost my track. I've sailed the deeper seas, hoping to find something to bring back better times. Oh, I'll say memories in my head, like Polaroids on walls. They remind you to look ahead. But time is running out. 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 Time is running. Time is running out. But time is running out. What if my best days are over? They can't be over. They can't be over now. Time is running out. What if my best days are over? They can't be over now. Time is running out. Time is running out. Time is running out.
Evening, all, it's Jim here. Welcome to the third in our series of live streams that help, hopefully help, learners get ready for their next BTEC National Business Unit 6. And this has been recorded, as are all our live streams. So if you've not had a chance to catch the first and second series, or first and second sessions, then please do find them on YouTube or tutortu.net/live. Let's take a look at what we're covering in tonight's session. And well, I've mentioned we've done two already in our first session. Quite a long session, that one. We dived into a new case study that we've written for these live streams and looked at how you can make the best use of case study information, including a concept called paddle, which we'll revisit briefly tonight. That was to help us pick up maximum marks in AF1 and AF5, 12 marks for each of those, so 24 in total. Last night in session 2, we dived into the sort of the depth of Unit 6. It's about principles of management. So we looked at how to use key management concepts, terms, in our responses and our report and presentation to demonstrate to the examiner that we have indeed been studying principles of management. And tonight we're going to be taking a look at the sort of second half of each of the activities, which is making recommendations and showing some balance by reflecting on alternative approaches. That's another 24 marks going. So that would have most of the marks done. And tomorrow night, we're going to take a look at how to structure that report and the presentation, and also do a quick sort of 5 and 10 minute Q&A, any questions you've got about Unit 6. So that must mean that tonight we are looking at AF3 and AF7, session 3. And 24 marks going for this. So we mentioned these assessment focus or assessment foci because there are 8 of them. You get examined twice in activity 1, AF1 through to 4, and activity 2, AF5 through to 8. So we're looking here at AF3 and AF7. So AF3 is in the report, and AF7 is in the presentation. And don't forget, equal marks for the report and the presentation. The examiner's reports will comment on this tomorrow night, have said that too many learners are not leaving enough time to do themselves justice in the presentation. Just the same marks, so don't leave that literally to the last minute. Too many marks being lost on the activity 2. Okay, now if we want to get to a merit, we know from session 1 that we need to be hitting the mid part of band 3 on average in each of the 8 assessment foci. So just looking at AF3 and AF7, there are up to 12 marks for AF3, 12 for AF7, so 24 marks. If we were to hit mark band 3, then we'd be getting on average over 50 marks. I think it's 53 we said, didn't we? So that would be good news. That would be a merit. And in band 3 for these AFs, it's all about suggesting some alternative approaches that are mostly applied in context. Okay, well, I think we can do better than that. And justifying them and providing alternatives that are mostly balanced in the context of business goals. Well, hopefully the approach we'll suggest tonight will mean that we're much more likely to get closer to mark band 4, which is where the really high marks are awarded. We want to be entirely appropriate. We want to be making balanced justifications or showing some balance, and always, always, always in context of those critical things in the case of the business goals. Nice to see Karen in the live chat tonight, and welcome everybody who's joining us live. I'll try to get some of your answers on the screen a bit later. So just to summarize, this is really important here. When we look at our recommendations that flow in both the report and the presentation, it's really important that they are entirely appropriate for the business. Yeah, not just, I don't know, make staff happier. They need to be very specific to the issues facing and the challenges facing the business. Therefore, they need to be made in context. So don't just make recommendations that could apply to any business. Apply them, in this case, to our case study CLS. And most importantly, perhaps, although it's really important to be in context, they need to be balanced. So we need to include a sort of however point to say that this might not necessarily be effective, and why, and what might an alternative approach be. So we need to make sure that in each of our recommendations, however many we do, we show some balance. And we're not talking about writing loads here, but a sentence or two, really important. Mushahid is saying, will this live be uploaded as a video? Yeah, absolutely. So every live stream we do in all of our subjects are automatically recorded by YouTube. And as soon as we press the finish button on this session in about 25 minutes or so, it's automatically available as a recording there forever to be used. Okay, so we're going to focus in this 25 minutes or so on activity 2, because back in session 1, we did a little bit of stuff on activity 1. Now, obviously, we're going to look at the 2 formats tomorrow in terms of how to set them out. But what's quite nice about activity 2 is that it's a different way of presenting the information. You're required to produce some slides and some speaker notes or a script. And so I thought activity 2 would be a good thing to use tonight as we dive into this case study. And we're going to look at these 2 tasks there. So there we go on screen. Show your understanding of how the culture at CLS may impact Alicia's ability to affect the changes she's proposing. So often in the activity 2 section, it's often a little bit more specific. In this case, we're focusing on culture. And then recommend the actions, the change management actions that could be taken to enable the business to make a success. So we're going to try and find the 2 or 3 issues here, or impacts, ways that the culture is impacting her ability to make the change. And then we want to then move on to giving the examiner some recommendations, some actions that she could take, or the business could take. And that's what we're going to do. Now, you might be saying, well, Jim, what's culture? I've forgotten what culture is. I might not necessarily have spent a lot of time learning that or being taught that. Well, let's quickly give you a minute or 2 minutes on what culture is, because really that's all you need to know. So with this, it's clearly about the focus on culture. So what we need to be thinking about is, okay, as we start to get into the case study, and we see it for the first time in part A, we need to be thinking about 2 or 3 ways, no more than that, in which culture might affect the ability to make the changes. And then for each of those in our presentation, our slides and our speaker notes, we then need to give for each of them a recommended action that hopefully affects the ability to make the change. It needs to be in context, in other words, using the case study, but also importantly, it needs to be balanced it needs to reflect how it may not be effective, or if there's an alternative. Now, what do we mean by culture? We need a bit of information here, a bit of content from the case study, don't we? Well, there are different models and theories out there on culture, so I'm not sure what you may or may not have been taught about different models and approaches to culture, but the one I really like is the one that's really easy to remember and to apply to any case study if culture comes up, is Charles Handy, a famous business theorist, psychologist as well. He just said, culture is the way we do things around here. And what he means by that is culture is quite a complex mix of different things, but you can spot the evidence of culture by things like, and I've just stuck 2 or 3 of them on the screen here, how decisions are made. The way we take decisions around here is whatever. Who takes the decisions? Really important. How is communication made in a business? That affects the way things are done, doesn't it? Is communication frequent? Always being updated? Is it on a need-to-know basis? Who gets to find out the important things? How are they shared? How do employees and the management communicate between each other in the organizational hierarchy? So as you read the case study, you can often pick out a few little golden nuggets of decision-making, communication. And I think the one on the right is the really powerful one to use, because almost certainly there'll be something in the case study around how employees are treated, rewarded, paid, potentially motivated. That's real. And also not just staff, of course, how customers are treated, maybe how suppliers, other stakeholders are treated. So that's what we mean by culture. Nothing more than that. It's the way things are done around here. And look out for who's taking decisions, how staff are treated, communicated, how they're paid. All that kind of stuff is useful evidence for any assessment of the impact of culture on a business. Hopefully that's useful. And if you've not had a chance yet to look at the CLS case study, you'll see, as we'll see in a second, lots of information in there about culture, particularly if you use this kind of approach to think, well, these are the kind of things that must be about culture. Okay. Now, don't forget, we mentioned this in session 1. Here's just a quick reminder. All of our recommendations and all of our alternative approaches and balance need to draw from the case study. So it's not like that it's the first part of the report or the first part of the presentation that's about the case study. Everything that flows needs to be drawn from the case study in context. So don't forget to keep on using in activity 2 our paddles. Are there any patterns? Is there any trend in the data or what's happening that might affect our recommendations in our presentation? What actions are the key people taking in the case study? What have they done? What have they said? How do they feel? How does that affect the culture in the business? Look out for those. Think about the data. If you can bring the table, one or two of the figures of the tables into your answers, that's really good application. That's using context. That's helping to build some power to your recommendations and approaches. And lastly, of course, don't forget, and this is the most important thing, really always, everything you write, link it back to the stated aims. Always link it back. Your point isn't finished. Your presentation isn't finished. Your speaker notes aren't finished until you've made sure that you link everything back to the stated aims, because ultimately that's what this unit is all about. Okay, so, excuse me, we've got about 15, 20 minutes to have a look at a worked example of these recommendations and alternative approaches in action. So what I thought I'd do, I'll have a quick sip of my coffee whilst I put it over to you and suggest to you, well, what do you think? Is there anything you've seen in the case study that might be about culture? Anything, either the way staff are paid, who takes decisions, Alyssa's approach, whatever it is that you may have come across, feel free to add it into the live chat, and I'm happy to stick that on the screen if you want to have a go. I've got a few ideas, because what I wanted to do was to start to think about the top part of the presentation, which is the first part of activity 1, isn't it? What are the aspects of culture that may affect her ability to deliver her changes? Because what you can then do, having identified those, is then move on to, well, I need a recommendation, don't I? Here's something that I think needs to happen to address this issue. What do we think? Anyone got any thoughts? I'll keep an eye out on the live chat as we go. Maybe give you a few seconds. Of course, if you're watching this on catch up, maybe now's the time to pause the video and have a think about it, or maybe look back over the case study. What have we found? Was there anything at all in the case study? Well, I know there is. Of course, I know there is because I wrote the case study, but deliberately put in, and the examiner will always put in items into the case study that are there to be used. It doesn't have to be data. It can be something someone's done, something someone said, all that kind of stuff. Julia, there is a link to the case study in the description for each of the YouTube videos. So by all means, go and download that at any stage and share it around. While sharing a think, I'll keep an eye on that live chat. Here's my first one. I think reading through the case study, what's interesting is under Terry was the CEO for 50 years, founded the business. He paid everyone really well, and everyone was paid together. They were rewarded together. What do I mean by that? Well, firstly, he paid them, we were told he paid them above average wages. And in figure 1, I think, figure 1, could be figure 2, I need to check. Where's my case study? It told us what the average wage was compared with the industry average. So there's some evidence there that staff were paid well. They were all paid an annual bonus. They were all given the opportunity to stay in the CLS holiday homes in the Lake District. Labour turnover was low. Staff are staying a long time. So all that suggests to me that a part of the culture was we're all in this together and we're all being well looked after. Now, why does that matter? That could be a point to develop in your presentation. Well, Alicia wants to move to a different way of rewarding performance, doesn't she? She wants to introduce individual store performance data, to move away. In fact, she cancelled the annual bonus. She sold the holiday home. So that's going to have implications, isn't it? Because she wants to move, she wants to change to a very different way of rewarding people. That's the issue. That's the cultural issue. So that will be the issue, or the way, or the challenge, if you like, for Alicia. Then your recommendation would need to be 2 or 3 things that she might need to do to help smooth that transition. What could they be? Here's another one that I came up with. What do you think to this one? I think the case study suggests that culturally, the business is under Terry, this is before Alicia comes in and starts to shake things up, is very much focused on the long term and customers. Customer service is right at the front of this business, over and above objectives for sales and profits. So I think you could say the culture was really customer focused, full of traditions, full of rituals. These are all things that help define the way we do things around here, isn't it? So, for example, an obsession with greeting customers as they come into the store. Now, that will be a bit of context to use. That's context, that's application. The cafes where the knit and natter and local groups met every week. The insistence that checkout queues are really short, to have lots of people on the checkouts. All of those were a really important part of the culture. Why is that an issue? Well, because Alicia needed to try and convince staff that that was inefficient, that all of those sort of things are fine, but they don't lead to an efficient business where they have to compete against Aldi and Lidl. So she's decided she has to change that. The question is really, should she bother trying to persuade people that that's not the right way to go? Great. So Marsan has put in a fantastic point here. Let's get that on the screen before I display my third, because it could be the same one as I've got coming up, isn't it? Here it is. So Marsan said, Terry always put the customer service objectives first to make sure that customers were satisfied with the service. Well, that's my second point, isn't it? Except in fewer words and more concise and more focused, you might say. Whereas Alicia is much more focused on competition for the business. That is spot on. That's the issue, isn't it? That's the cultural point. So but what do we recommend? What flows from that? Great point. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate everyone who puts answers in, really good answers as well, like that, into the live chat. And here's my third one. Now, I'll come back to tomorrow into how many points do you need to develop. I think you have to have at least 2. And if you had time to do 3, that's great. Any more than that, I think you're probably wasting your time. But I came up with a third, which I just want to develop as a worked answer. I reckon in CLS, I sense from the case study there's a lot of resistance to modern things, modern ways of doing things, in particular, resistance to the implementation of e-commerce. So that was that last chunk of the case study, wasn't it? Alicia's trying to introduce e-commerce into all the stores so that they can start to offer a wider range of products and also hopefully increase their sales and profitability. But we do have some evidence that staff are not used to that kind of change. They've been selling groceries in the same way for the last 50 years, haven't they? And therefore, that's cultural, isn't it? That's ingrained in the way they do things. And of course, e-commerce with picking and packing and all that kind of stuff, that creates a new skill set required. So I think that's quite interesting. So what's the implication? Well, Alicia needs e-commerce to work. So we need to be making recommendations or alternative approaches that say, here's how you might be able to overcome this cultural issue to help make it work. So my recommendations need to focus on 2 or 3 practical things that she might be able to do to help overcome the cultural issues, overcome resistance to change. Yeah. So let's take a look at that one, shall we? I'll keep an eye on the live chat to see if any more contributions come in, like Marsan's. Awesome contribution, that. A number of people asked me last night to say, please, Jim, can you just put on screen an example of how to put the slides together for the presentation? Well, that's what I've done. I've had a go. So here we go. So here's my first draft of my activity 2. And this is, don't forget, this is just 1 point I'm developing here. So I'd certainly want to do it for at least 1 more in activity 2. If I could, I'd try to do it for a third if I had time, but always better to fully explore and develop the point in context and show some balance than try and rush it and do too many. Another question coming in here. Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? Let's come back to this because this could be a recommendation, isn't it? Just picking up the point here for way 3 there, which is this sort of lack of confidence in adopting new technology. It's also time consuming to reskill the staff. That's an issue, isn't it? That's a cultural issue. Therefore, there's potentially a loss of time, a loss of competitiveness. Superb stuff. Okay, so here's my example. Now, don't forget, we'll go through this in session 4. Don't spend time making your slides look fancy. Don't spend time adding images of supermarkets or making slides transition from the complete waste of time. Complete waste of time. All the examiner wants to see is your content, how you're addressing activity 2. So here's my first one. Now, I think tomorrow I'm going to muse on potentially putting another slide in that just repeats and reminds the speaker of the key aims, because I think we need to keep those in focus. But anyway, my first slide at the minute says, how culture may affect the proposed changes. So that's what MAS to do. And I've just put a little line that says we've identified 3 ways. Now, if I only had 2, I'd say we've identified 2 ways in which culture could impact the proposed changes. Recommendations for how each of these can be tackled are explained in the following slides, along with supporting speaker notes. So in other words, what's following is my recommendations for each of these ways or issues. Now, I've already done it for 1, but obviously we'd want to do it for at least 2. And I've just listed there what the issues are, or the ways that culture impacts the strategy are. So let's go into the first one. And what I've done is I've broken this down, see what you think, into sort of really 3 or 4 slides for each way. Now, you might say there's too many words on these slides. Well, that's fine. I mean, you could easily turn these bullets into the starting point for your speaker notes and then just add a little bit of extra information. But I think I'd rather explain things in a slide reasonably well rather than just putting 1 or 2 words and it's not obvious what the point is. So here's the problem. Here's my way 3, resistance to adoption of modern technology. What's the problem? What's the problem that needs solving? So the staff aren't used to technological change. They've been with Terry for 50 years. But customers, perhaps increasingly, may want e-commerce, but there might be a lot of CLS customers who don't. So I'm imagining maybe older customers, maybe a little bit more set in their ways, got used to this lovely customer service focused experience in a store, being greeted, nice chat with the cashier, all that kind of stuff. They're maybe not that keen on buying their things using e-commerce. So Similarly, a lot of long-standing staff, and there's likely to be some skills gaps there. And all of that, those cultural issues create a likely resistance to change. So there's my problem. I've set the problem up. What I now want to do is I want to recommend 2 or 3 things that Alicia and the business could do to try and overcome the problem. But before I do that, do you remember I said that each of your recommendations and alternative approaches has to be linked? So it links, always link to the aims and objectives. Yeah. So the heading is, why does this matter? Well, because they have a growth, a particularly aggressive sales growth. They want to increase significantly. Was it from 45 million to 100 million sales per year? That's a very ambitious sales growth. And they've identified e-commerce as a key way of doing that, in addition to opening new stores. And linking back to the data, we know that currently CLS has no e-commerce, whereas in the UK, it's just short of 13%. So there's a big risk here. If we don't adopt e-commerce, we are not going to achieve our aim of achieving £100 million worth of sales each year. Similar, you might also argue that e-commerce, it matters because it's likely to be more profitable than running a traditional store. Therefore, because you're using the shop assets better and you're using the staff, therefore, it's also consistent with achieving the aim to increase the profit margin to industry averages. So however you do that, make sure you've got at least one and ideally a couple of links back to the aims of the business before you come on to your recommendations. So here is, so if I go back to, Kelly's just asked, were you talking about or showing us a certain structure? Yeah. So if you think about the structure, let's just go back, Kelly, here's my opening slide. I'm saying I'm going to identify an issue and take you through why it matters, what the problem is, and what the recommendations are. So start with the problem. What's the issue? Explain how it links to the aims. Why does this matter? And then our recommendations. So I've put 5 down here. I think you could maybe get away with 2 or 3 as long as they're well developed in the speaker notes. But the recommendations need to be relevant to the business and in context. What I think these are. So hopefully you agree they are. So our recommended actions to address this issue, to solve the problem of culture. Firstly, use a focus group and staff meetings. Explore the staff concerns. So communication from Unit 6. Next, conduct a skills audit. So you'll come across that when you're studying training, trying to identify what the training gaps are, the training needs of a business. You audit to see where the gaps are, who can't do what or who can. So that would be a good recommendation. And in my speaker notes, I would just develop and explain, maybe just a sentence, why that would be a really useful thing to do. Thirdly, a slow rollout of e-commerce via 5 pilot stores. So they've got 50 stores. Don't introduce it in all 50. Start by doing it with a small number. So maybe 5 to start to see how it works. And I've also suggested rewarding participation in pilots and completing skills training. This was an idea we came up with last night, wasn't it? To give people rewards and bonuses and targets, easily achievable if they get involved in helping out with e-commerce, to build this sort of positive aspect to it. And I've also suggested that one recommendation might be to introduce the e-commerce into the new stores they're opening rather than the existing stores. And the reason there is that might be a good approach to consider. So it's like an alternative approach because we're opening new stores. We're going to be recruiting a new store team. And therefore, hopefully, with e-commerce in mind, we might be recruiting people who've maybe a little bit more, maybe a slightly better alignment of their experience and skills with what we want, compared with some of the staff in maybe the longer opened stores. So those are some recommended actions. Now, is that enough? Almost. They're in context. They're relevant to the business. They address a cultural issue. But what else do we need? Balance. Balance. I'll come back to your question in a second, Alison. So the balance slide, I think, just has to have some balance in it. So don't forget, balance is sort of saying, well, here's the recommendation, but of course, there's no guarantee it's going to work. There's some things that might might go wrong. You may need to adjust or take an alternative approach to this. Yeah. So that's not to say you don't do the e-commerce, but you may need to change and, if you like, flex your approach. So I think a slide for each of these issues that just has 2 or 3 bits of balance in saying, look, this isn't going to be easy. It's like a however point, isn't it? And explain what the alternative might be. So I would head it up: potential problems, alternative approaches. So introducing e-commerce isn't going to be easy. Could be quite costly. So that's balance. And it could be that the store pilots in maybe those first 5 stores actually identify all kinds of problems. Maybe the website doesn't work, the app doesn't work. Maybe staff have no idea where to go find the things that customers have ordered. Maybe customers don't come into the store on time to pick their groceries up, or they pick the wrong groceries up. All kinds of things can go wrong, can't they? So that's balance, isn't it? To say, look, this is quite costly and it's quite complex. Things are going to go wrong, so we will need to constantly reflect on how things are going. Possibly we may need to change. So here's an alternative approach. We may need to change the communication and how we explain how the e-commerce system works, maybe for shoppers who aren't used to it. It could be that when we start running e-commerce, the stock isn't there. So it may be that initially we have to offer a limited range of the fastest selling or the most popular products rather than offering everything. So it doesn't really matter what you say, as long as you've got some balance and you're suggesting 1 or 2 things that would help maybe alleviate the problems of your recommendations. And that's really what it's about. There are 4 potential problems or alternative approaches there. I think you could get away with a couple, as long as you're speaking, it's just provide a few more words to explain what they are. And we'll look at this tomorrow night. I'm just going to pick up on one of the questions that Alison, that's Alison's question. Do I understand correctly, you're making 3 slides for each issue? Well, actually, to be honest with you, it's 4, isn't it? I start with the problem. If I just move your question out the way, Alison. I start with the problem, and you don't have to have 5 bullets. 3 or 4, 2 or 3 or 4 will be fine. What's the problem? What's the issue? Why does it matter? That's linking to the aims, linking to the objectives. That's in context, but we are linking. Really important. Then the recommendations, practical, relevant to the business. Don't have to have 5. You can have 2 or 3. It's absolutely fine. But then we need balance. So it's actually 4, isn't it? 4 slides. I just think that 4th slide, I would head it up: potential problems, alternative approaches, just gives your issue some balance. It makes it really easy for the examiner, I think, or easier for them to see that actually your point is being balanced here. It's not just one-sided. So that's what I would suggest in terms of the slides there. And there was another question just coming back. Let's have a look. Luke's asking, shouldn't we include transitions to get the extra presentation marks? Absolutely not. No, there are no marks going for transitions. The marks for structure and presentation are essentially around a logical structure to the report and the presentation in terms of how it's structured and explained and laid out. No marks whatsoever that I can see from the mark scheme for fancy transitions or graphs or images and all that kind of stuff. Keep it really, really simple. It's what you write and type that matters, not how the slides move around. Don't waste time creating transitions. It just gets in the way, I think. Excellent. Let's have a look. See what else we've got here. Johnny's back. Welcome back, Johnny. Let's stick your question on here. Oh, it's yeah, okay. I think you're making a point here about one of the issues, isn't it? Yeah, employees maybe think that they're being replaced in the future if they don't adapt. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, wasn't it? And that's the balance, isn't it? That's the balance with this, which in this case, pushing modern technology through into these stores, either the existing stores or the new stores, by definition, it's going to create some resistance to change. That's the nature of culture. People get used to doing things the way things are done around here. And yeah, there could well be a feeling that, if you don't get involved in this, it's game over down the line. And indeed, under Alyssa, it might be. It might be, mightn't it? Hopefully not. So I think you get the idea. Now, tomorrow night, we're going to go through a little bit of stuff around structure on the report, and we'll go through some structure on the presentation and a bit of stuff about speaker notes, and also have a Q&A on Unit 6 in general. But hopefully that's a useful thing. I think the key point there on recommendations is pick 2, 3 if you can. 4 and 5, don't need them. Develop them fully in context and make sure that you link to the aims, but also really importantly, you show some balance. So I think that balance slide in the presentation for each of those issues or ways is really important. Really, really important. There we go. We are done. Now we have a one more session, don't we? For Unit 6 tomorrow night. We'll go through report structure, presentation structure, and we'll also leave a bit of time for anyone to ask any questions about Unit 6, maybe some stuff that we've covered in previous sessions. As always, hopefully you found it useful. If you have, give us a thumbs up on the like button on YouTube to help help the algorithm suggest this session to other Unit 6 students getting ready for the exam. Looking forward to tomorrow night. Chance for you to ask some questions if you get a chance, and you've not yet caught the first 2 sessions plus this one. Obviously, they're available on recording as well, so you've got a chance to catch up. And I'll try to make sure that the link to the case study is in the description for all of the videos if you get a chance to look at that and refresh your memory of it before tomorrow night's session. Anyway, all the best, crew. Thanks for joining us live. Great to see you. I'll see you tomorrow night for session 4. Cheers.